Ethan Miller was just a normal young man living in a quiet town with tall trees and quiet roads, and peaceful nights with stars in the sky. He lived in a small house with a broken fence, and an old car that coughed when it started, and a dog named Max who barked at every bird that flew too close. Ethan worked at a local repair shop, fixing broken things and drinking too much cheap coffee, while old radio songs played in the background. Life was the same every day, and Ethan never expected anything strange to happen to him, but that night something strange did happen, something that changed everything. It started with a sound like humming that came from the sky, but soft, like a song from far away. Ethan was walking home after work with Max when he saw a blue light moving slowly above the trees, like a glowing fish swimming through the sky. He stopped and stared, and Max stopped too, with his ears up and his nose in the air. The light grew brighter and brighter, and then it was everywhere around them, like a dream made of stars. Ethan felt his body grow light, like he was floating, and the ground was gone. He tried to speak, but no words came out, and then the world turned white like paper, and he was gone. He woke up in a room that did not feel like earth. The walls were silver and soft like clouds, but also hard like metal, and they glowed with a light that had no shadows. He looked around and saw no doors, no windows, just smooth shapes and soft lights, and something that felt like a quiet wind, even though the air did not move. Ethan sat up and rubbed his eyes and said hello, but the room did not answer. Then a voice came from above, clear and calm, and without any emotion. Welcome. Subject: Ethan Miller, you have been selected for the Universal Bonding Program. Please remain still. Ethan blinked and looked up, but there was nothing above him, only a silver ceiling that curved like the inside of a shell. What is this? Where am I? He asked, but the voice did not answer that question. The program begins now, the voice said. You will be matched with a partner based on genetic compatibility and emotional range. Success in this program will support long-term peace between species. Failure may result in permanent rejection of human relations. Wait, what species? What program? Ethan asked, but the voice was already gone. The lights grew brighter, and he had to close his eyes. Then something clicked like a lock being opened. When he opened his eyes again, a new part of the wall had changed, and a shape stepped into the room. It was a person, or something like a person, tall and thin, with smooth purple skin that shone like oil and long silver hair tied behind her. She had bright yellow eyes that seemed to look through him, and she wore armor that moved when she walked like it was alive. She stopped in front of Ethan and crossed her arms and tilted her head with a frown. Assigned as my mate, a human really, she said, and her voice was sharp like a knife made of ice. Ethan stood up slowly, unsure what to do or say, and Max was not here, and he felt very alone. Who are you? He asked. The girl looked at him and raised one eyebrow and said, I am Zarali, warrior of Varelia, and I have just been forced to enter the bonding program because of you. Tried to speak again, but nothing came out, and his brain felt like it was melting. She stepped closer and said softly, I do not like surprises, and this program is a waste of time, but orders are orders. He thought, opened his mouth again, and said, I think there has been a mistake. I am just a guy from Earth. I fix old machines, and I drink bad coffee, and I was walking my dog when I saw a light, and now I am Hera Sarali. Looked at him for a long moment, then turned and pressed something on her wrist. Wall opened again, and she said, Follow me, human. Your romantic mission begins now. He stood frozen in place, not sure if he should laugh or run or cry, but something deep inside told him he had no choice. So he followed her through the glowing door into a future he did not understand. Ethan followed Zarali through the glowing door with heavy steps and a spinning mind, as the light around him pulsed like a living thing, and the floor felt soft under his feet, but also strong like walking on frozen clouds. The hallway stretched ahead like a tunnel of light, with shapes on the walls that moved and shifted like water made of glass, and he tried not to stare too much, but every part of this place felt like something from a dream or a story told by someone who had seen the stars up close. Zaral walked ahead with perfect posture and silent steps, and every time her armor moved, it made a sound like wind over metal, and her long silver hair swung behind her like a flag carried by a warrior from another world. She did not speak, and she did not look back, and Ethan wondered if she even wanted him there at all, or if he was just some random name pulled from a long list of unlucky humans chosen for some weird space matchmaking game. They entered a larger room filled with floating lights and strange machines that moved without touch, and long curved windows that looked out into endless black space filled with stars that burned like tiny fires across a dark ocean. Ethan stopped and stared at the view, unable to speak because it hit him like a wave that he was really far from Earth, far from his home, and Max, and the smell of rain on old pavement, and the feeling of waking up in his own Bajarli. finally turned and looked at him with eyes that glowed like twin suns, and she said, "This is the observation deck, and this is where you will learn the truth of your situation." Ethan took a breath and said, "I already know the truth. I was kidnapped by space people and forced into some kind of dating program with a girl who does not even like Messerali." Raised her eyebrow again, and stepped closer and said, "If I did not like you, I would have left you in the selection chamber to get lost among the walls until the program recycled you into dated." That made Ethan take a step back, but then he saw a small twitch in the corner of her mouth, almost like she was joking, or at least not being completely serious. She walked over to a glowing table and touched it, and a large image floated into the air between them, showing two circles spinning around each other, one red and one blue, with lines connecting them and text and symbols. "He could not read this," she said, "is the match matrix that connects to life forms based on traits, values, memories, and future potential. And somehow it chose you and me as a compatible Parathon." Stared at the floating image and said, "I do not even know how to talk to aliens. I get nervous ordering food at drive-through windows back home." Azarali looked at him and said, "I have trained in over 900 combat simulations. I have studied the strategy of 10 war systems, and I have learned 5 languages through neural streaming. But none of that prepared me for this assignment." Ethan looked at her, then looked at the stars outside and said, "So what do we do now?" She said, "We begin the bonding process and complete our shared tasks until the council decides if we are a real match or a failed experiment, and if we fail, there may be consequences for both our kinds." Ethan blinked and said, "What kind of task?" Karali moved to the center of the room and pointed to a door that slowly slid open, revealing another hallway with soft lights and strange color steam trials, emotional sync exercises, and personal trust tests. She said, "And each one must be passed together." Ethan nodded slowly and followed her into the new hallway, his heart beating louder than before. As they walked, he saw other doors along the walls, some open and some closed, and he heard voices and strange sounds, and once he thought he saw another human talking to an alien with green skin and big eyes, but the door closed before he could be sure. Finally, they stopped at a room that looked like a training center with cushions on the floor and glowing shapes on the walls, and a small table with 2 seats. Aral turned to him and said, "Sit and eat. This is your first trial. We must share a meal and read each other's thoughts through nonverbal signals." Sat down and looked at the strange food on the table, small cubes of color that changed shape when he touched them, and a drink that fizzed without bubbles. He picked up one cube and looked at her, and said, "Are you sure this is food?" Rayleigh smiled just a little, and said, "It is more than food. It is trust in solid form, and you must take the first bite." Athan looked at the cube, looked at her, then looked out the window one more time at the stars and the unknown. Ahead, he took a breath and put the cube in his mouth and waited for what would happen next. The moment Ethan swallowed the strange cube, everything around him changed. The colors of the walls shifted from blue to green. The air felt warmer, and the soft hum in the room turned into a low rhythm, like a quiet heartbeat in the background. He blinked and looked at Zarali, whose eyes were fixed on him, as if waiting for something to happen, maybe a sign, maybe a spark, or maybe a failure. The cube tasted like nothing he had ever eaten before. It was not sweet or salty or spicy, but something else entirely, like music, if it could be food, like emotion wrapped in flavors. Arlie slowly reached for her own cube, her fingers graceful and careful, and placed it in her mouth and chewed without blinking, her yellow eyes never leaving Ethan's face for a moment. They sat in silence, reading each other without words, and something inside the air began to glow between them, like a soft thread of light weaving from his heart to hers. Then a soft chime echoed through the room, and the voice from before he returned, this time smoother and more focused. Initial trust phase completed. Emotional signal alignment at 63%. Compatibility confirmed. Prepared for task. Sequencer. Nezarali stood and brushed her armor with one hand and said, "The program has accepted the first step. We move forward now quickly, before the window closes." Stood still, unsure of what exactly he had just done, or why his chest felt both heavy and light at the same time. They walked out of the room and into another corridor, this one longer and darker, with small floating lights that followed them like tiny stars drifting on invisible strings. Raleigh walked fast, her movements smooth like a dancer trained in war, and Ethan tried to keep up without tripping over his own thoughts. He asked her quietly, "What is the next task?" And she replied without turning up, "Unity challenge. We must work as one to solve a task that cannot be done alone, and it must be completed under pressure." He thought and swallowed and nodded, trying to act brave, though his heart felt like a drum in his ears, and his legs felt like soft spaghetti under a somda. Corridor ended at a tall metal door with glowing symbols and a single hand panel. Sarali placed her hand on it, and the Door opened with a quiet hiss, revealing a large room filled with floating platforms, walls covered in changing symbols, and a large pit in the center that pulsed with light above. Them hovered a machine with multiple arms and glowing lenses turning, slowly watching like a giant floating either. Voice returns. Trial begins now. Challenge objective: build a stable bridge across the pit, using platform modules. Cooperation required. Time limit 10 minutes. Failure will result in termination of bonding. Trial. Ethan stepped forward and looked around the room, trying to understand what he was supposed to do, when one of the floating modules flew toward him and stopped just in front of his hand. Zarali already had one in her hands and began moving it with quick precision, fitting it into the air where it clicked and hovered in place. Ethan followed her lead, copying her motions, though slower and clumsier, and together they began to form a line of floating blocks across the pit, each one locking into place like a piece of a living puzzle. The machine above began spinning faster as time passed, and the lights in the room turned from soft blue to deep red, and the voice repeated, "Time remaining 5 minutes. Continue construction." Zeril glanced at Ethan and said, "Focus, move with me, follow my rhythm, do not try to think too much." Ethan nodded and began matching her pace, block after block, movement after movement, feeling his fear melt into something sharper, something calmer, like he was inside a wave and riding it, instead of sinking under it. The bridge grew longer, almost halfway across, when one of Ethan's blocks shook and slipped out of place, floating away into the pit. He gasped and reached for it, but his fingers missed, and the machine above let out a warning. Tonazarli grabbed a new module and placed it firmly over the missing gap, covering his mistake without a word, and nodded once before returning to work. Ethan bit his lip and worked faster, sweat forming on his forehead as the red light pulsed faster, and the voice said, "Time remaining 2 minutes. Final phase initiated." They moved like parts of a machine now. Ethan and Zarali, two shapes in motion, one guided by skill, the other by instinct, slowly finishing the last section of the floating bridge. When the final block clicked into place, a loud chime rang out, and the room turned gold, and the machine above stopped spinning. Trial complete. Compatibility rating increased. Cooperative success achieved. Ethan dropped to one knee, breathing hard, and looked up at Zarali, who stood still as ever, her eyes calm but not cold. "Not anymore. You did well for a first-timer," she said, with something that almost sounded like respect in her voice. "Thanks, I guess," Ethan said with a tired smile, though his arms felt like noodles and his head buzzed with pressure and pride. She offered him her hand, and he took it, and together they walked across the bridge they had built, one block at a time, toward whatever waited next on the other side. Ethan walked beside Zarali across the bridge they had built, step by step, floating blocks beneath their feet, glowing softly like stars pulled into a path just for them. And though his legs still shook from the rush of the last trial, something inside him felt stronger, like a quiet fire waking up in the dark. Zarali did not speak, but her presence beside him felt different now, not cold, not distant like before, but steady like a wall that did not fall, even when the wind screamed and the sky broke apart. They reached the other side of the trial chamber, and another door slid open without a sound, revealing a hallway, longer and dimmer than any they had seen so far, lined with tiny lights that flickered like candles in the wind. "This is the living sector," Zarali said, "where the bonded pairs stay during the program, and where our next trial begins. But it is also where other species live. Some of them do not trust humans, and some of them do not trust Methan." Raised an eyebrow and asked, "What kind of trial is it this time? Another puzzle, another trust game with food that tastes like a rainbow?" Zaral shook her head and replied, "This is not a planned trial. This is a social scan test. We will be observed while interacting with the station and its people. No rules, no warnings, just eyes watching every word and action to measure how real our bond truly is." They entered a common room filled with strange shapes and glowing seats and screens showing moving symbols and colors Ethan could not read, and there were other beings there too. Some tall, some short, some with wings or scales or extra eyes, and each one turned to look at them as they stepped in. One of them, a large creature with blue armor and a long tail, stood up and walked toward them, its face unreadable but its eyes sharp. "Hugh brought you a match here," Zarali said, the creature with a voice like thunder rolling through clouds. "How interesting, and how risky is Ethan?" Zarali said with a cool voice, her hand lightly touching Ethan's shoulder. "He is my bonded human, and we are in the middle of the program." The creature laughed a low, rough sound, and said, "We will see how long that bond lasts," then turned and walked away without another word. Ethan looked around the room uneasy, and asked, "Are they all like that? Do they all hate us?" "Not all," Zarli said, "but enough to make this place dangerous for someone who does not know how to move carefully." She led him to a food station filled with orbs of color and small dishes that hissed steam, and said, "Choose something, eat with me, act natural. The watchers are always near, even if you cannot see." Bempton picked a small purple orb and a round flat thing that smelled like mint and metal, then followed her to a low table where they sat on cushions that shifted shape to fit their bodies. As he took his first bite, he heard a loud crash from behind, and turned to see a group of creatures pushing and yelling, one of them holding a strange device flashing red lights and shouting in a language he could not understand. Aralee stood up in an instant, pulling Ethan behind her, and said, "Stay low, that is not part of the test, that is real." Security drones flew into the room in seconds, small floating machines with blinking lights and long arms, each moving fast and locking on targets with beams of light. The creature with the device turned and saw Ethan and pointed at him, screaming something that made the others freeze. Then the creature ran toward him, device raised high and eyes wild. Ethan ducked as Aralee leaped between them, her armor flaring with energy as she blocked the strike with her arm. The device sparked and cracked, and the creature fell back, with a snarl. Drones surrounded them in a circle, voices from the ceiling calling for calm and order and warning of consequences for violent acts. During bonding, Aralee stood tall as the drones scanned them, and Ethan saw her glare like fire made solid, ready to fight again if needed. A tense silence, the drones floated back, and the lights in the room returned to normal. The hostile creature was taken away, and the others returned to their seats, whispering in low tones. Ethan sat down slowly, his breath quick and sharp, and said, "I thought this was a peaceful program, not a war." Zoni Zarel sat beside him, her face calm again, but her hand shaking slightly as she reached for another food orb, and said, "Peace is never easy, and never quiet, not out here among the stars, and silence hides danger better than noise." Then she looked at him and said, "You handled yourself well. For someone untrained, most humans would have run, or screamed. I wanted to run," Ethan admitted, "but my legs forgot how, and my heart was too busy trying to break out of my chest." Aralee let out a sound like a quiet laugh, and said, "Good, then maybe you are not completely useless after all." They sat together as the room settled around them, eating in silence while unseen eyes watched from behind hidden panels and floating walls, recording every moment, every breath, every glance. Somewhere far above, another test was being prepared, and neither of them knew what it would bring, or how it would change the strange path they had only just begun to walk together. The next cycle began with silence, a long still silence that filled the air like fog, soft and heavy, and full of things unsaid. As Ethan and Zarel left the common room, and walked back to the corridor that led to their assigned quarters on the station, the lights above them flickered gently like stars behind clouds, and the floor under their feet seemed to hum with slow pulses like a heartbeat trying to calm itself after a storm. Zarel walked without a word, her face unreadable, her hands by her sides, clenched only slightly, just enough for Ethan to notice, just enough to know that something inside her was not settled. Ethan stayed close, but did not speak. He wanted to ask what that attack had meant, or if they were now targets, or if he had done something wrong, but every question felt too big and too heavy for the moment. When they reached their room, the door slid open with a soft sound, and they stepped inside to a space made of smooth metal and soft light, with 2 sleeping pods, one on each side, and a round table between them with a glowing map of stars slowly turning in the air. Zarel sat first, her back straight, and her eyes on the map, her voice quiet when she finally spoke. "Do you know how Varelians choose leaders?" she asked, her tone not sharp like before, but soft like a breeze through dry leaves. Ethan shook his head and sat across from her, watching the map spin slowly, like the galaxy itself was trying to think. "Retrained from the age of 5. She said, "in war strategy, flight logic, diplomacy, and discipline. We are taught that emotion is weakness, but we are also told that trust is the strongest weapon in any war." Ethan nodded slowly, unsure where she was going, but feeling the truth in her voice. "When I was chosen for this bonding program," she said, "I thought it was a mistake, or worse, a punishment. They said it was honor, but I saw it as exile until I saw the report. The one about Yumi." He asked me, "What did it say?" "That you were ordinary," she replied. "Not special, not trained, not brave, not skilled, just human, just simple." Ethan raised his eyebrow and gave a half laugh. "That sounds about right," he said. "I am not a hero or a genius or a warrior. I fix things back home, and sometimes I do it well, and sometimes I break them even more." As Zarel looked at him, and for the first time her eyes did not seem to judge him or test him, but simply see him as he was. "That is what confused me," she said. "They matched me with someone like you, and I did not understand why until today, until the bridge and the food trial and the attackathon." Leaned forward, elbows on the table, and said, "What changed? You did not run," she answered. "You did not hide. You stood next to me. You followed my steps. You made mistakes, but you kept trying, and you never blamed me, not once. And I have seen warriors with 10 years of training who fail at that. Ethan felt his chest warm, and not from pride, but from something deeper. Something older, something that had waited quietly for someone to notice. I guess I am stubborn, he said, or just slow to give up. Riley smiled a small, real smile, not a smirk, not a mask, but a flash of something gentle, something human, even if she was not. She tapped the table, and the map faded away, replaced by an image of her home worldwide. Rivers of silver mountains taller than clouds, and cities that floated above green oceans. This is Verelia, she said. My home, and if we pass the program, you will be taken there for the final phase of the bonding process. Ethan stared at the image, eyes wide and full of wonder. It is beautiful, he whispered, like something out of a dream or a movie as Raleigh turned off the projection and stood, stretching her arms, and said, rest now. The next trial will begin when we are ready, and the watchers will be testing our emotional range. During downtime, Ethan stood too, and looked at his sleeping pod, shaped like a curved shell with soft lights inside, and said, do you think we can do this? Really pass all of it? Raleigh looked at him and said, I do not know, but I no longer think it is impossible. She stepped into her pod, and let the door close slowly, leaving Ethan alone in the quiet room with the hum of the station, and the soft memory of her words echoing in his chest. He lay in his own pod, staring up at the ceiling that showed stars slowly spinning far away, and let his eyes close. His thoughts filled his mind, like fireflies, blinking one by one. He thought of Earth, of Max, of coffee that tasted like burnt bread in sunlight through trees, and now he also thought of Zarali, of purple skin and golden eyes, and words spoken not with command but with care. Somewhere deep inside the station, a new trial was waiting, but for the first time since his strange journey began, Ethan did not feel afraid. The lights in the station dimmed to a soft blue as the next cycle began, a signal that rest time was ending and new tasks would soon begin. And Ethan woke inside his pod with a quiet buzz in his ears and a strange feeling in his chest, like something important had shifted while he slept. He sat up slowly, the ceiling still showing spinning stars and soft clouds of color, but the air felt different now, heavier somehow. Colder, like a quiet warning whispered through metal walls. Raleigh was already awake, standing near the round table, staring at a data panel in her hand, her brow tight and her lips pressed together. In a sharp line, she did not look at him when she spoke, but her voice was firm and low. Something is wrong. Ethan swung his legs over the edge of the pod and stood rubbing the back of his neck. Wrong? How? He asked. What happened? She turned the panel toward him, showing a red blinking symbol and a line of text that flashed every few seconds. Bonding progress, evaluation, incomplete, potential failure. Detected. Ethan frowned and leaned closer, reading it again and again, trying to make sense of what it meant. Cannot be right. We completed the bridge trial. We passed the social scan. We even got through that food cube thing. He said we were doing fine. I thought so, did I? Zaral answered, but the system says our last results were invalid. It claims there was no record of emotional sync during our last trial. It is as if someone erased it. Ethan felt a knot twist in his stomach as he stared at the message. Erased by what, or by Hazaral? Narrowed her eyes and said, I do not believe in system errors, not here. Not on a station like this, not in a program designed by the Galactic Council. Everything is backed up, everything is observed, unless someone interfered from the inside. Ethan blinked and said, you mean sabotage? Yes, she replied, and if we do not fix it, we will fail the program, and everything we have done will be wasted. And worse, your people and mine may lose all chance of alliance. Ethan ran a hand through his hair and said, so what do we do? How do we prove we passed when the records are gone? Looked at him and said, we go to the core. The core? He asked, you mean like the control center? She nodded and said, every data string, every trial result, every movement is recorded there. If someone erased our file, it must have left a trace. They left the room, quickly moving through narrow halls and quiet chambers, until they reached a hidden lift behind a false wall, activated by a special pattern on Zarali's wrist. Platius. The lift moved downward, the walls glowed with shifting lines of energy, and Ethan felt like they were falling through time, not just space. The doors opened to a long tunnel filled with humming machines, wires like vines, and a distant sound like water running through pipes. They moved quietly, avoiding drone patrols and scanning lights until they reached a round chamber filled with tall columns and blinking consoles, the heart of the station glowing with raw info. Mashadzarali led him to a console near the back and pressed her hand against it, unlocking a private stream of data that spilled out in floating text and images. She searched fast, her fingers flying over controls, until a section opened, showing their trial logs, and then a gap. A black hole where one entry should be. There, Ethan said, pointing that Is the one the bridge trial? It is Gonazarli zoomed in and narrowed the scan, and after a moment a shadow appeared behind the blank space, a hidden layer that pulsed faintly. Swin placed a false code here, she said, a mask over the real file. It is not deleted, just buried. Can you bring it back? Ethan asked. Yes, but if I do, they will know we were here, she replied, and the one who did this will come after us. Ethan took a deep breath and said, then let them come, but we cannot let this stand. Smiled slightly and said, I agree, and tapped the final command. The screen flashed once, and the missing trial reappeared, along with a warning alert that began to sound across the station. A soft but rising tone like a siren buried under static. We have to go now, Zarali said, and they ran back through the tunnel. The lights behind them turning red as drones woke, and security systems shifted into search mode. They reached the lift and rode it in silence. Their breathing fast, their hands ready for anything. When they stepped back into the corridor near their quarters, a group of figures waited for them. Tall, armored with dark symbols on their chests. The same kind as the creature who attacked them before. So you found the truth, one of them said with a voice like gravel. Clever but foolish. Arali stepped in front of Ethan and said, we have proof of sabotage. If you harm us now, the council will see the truth. If you vanish, the figure replied, and raised a weapon that buzzed with dark energy. But before he could fire, the walls lit up with council lights, and high guard units appeared from hidden panels, weapons drawn, voices clear and firm. Stand down, you are under arrest for interference in a bonding program. Surrender now. Though enemy froze and then dropped their weapons as the guards moved in, taking them away without a word. Jarali turned to Ethan and said, that was close to close. Ethan nodded and said, but we made it, and now they will know we are not just pretending this bond. Israel, she looked at him for a long moment, and then said, maybe it is asterisk. The chamber of final judgment stood at the very top of the station, a dome of glass and light where stars could be seen in every direction like diamonds scattered across endless black velvet, and Ethan stood in the center beside Zarali, with his hands clenched at his sides, and his heart beating so loudly he was sure the entire council could hear it. Above them hovered the high observers, glowing forms of light and energy shaped like beings, but not quite solid, not quite real, speaking through waves of sound that echoed across the chamber, without words, without mouths. Of Varelia and Ethan Miller of Earth, the voice called, you have completed all required tasks. Your trials have been monitored and recorded. Your bond has been tested. Through trust, emotion, danger, and sabotage, your connection has survived. Your unity has been proven. Your cooperation has restored integrity to the program. Ethan looked at Zarali, and for the first time, he did not feel like a visitor from another world, or a lost human trying to survive in a galaxy of giants. He felt like he belonged. Met his gaze and nodded once, firm and sure, and though she said nothing in that moment, Ethan understood everything she meant, everything she felt. Observers continued, your pairing now stands as an example for future trials. Your results will be used as the base pattern for cross-species bonding programs between Earth and Varelia. This bond will not be terminated. This bond will move forward into Phase 2. Ethan raised his eyebrows and whispered, Phase 2, what is that? Zarali smiled softly and replied, that means we are not done, not yet. We are going to my home. The chamber lights dimmed, and the stars outside seemed to spin faster as the dome opened and a small vessel descended from above, shaped like a silver leaf, glowing at the edges with soft blue light. This is the gift of Varelia, the voice declared, a vessel for two, a symbol of peace and choice and unity. You may leave now, together. Your path is your own. Tashapazarli stepped forward and extended her hand to Ethan, and this time he did not hesitate. He took it without fear, without doubt, and together they entered the vessel as the chamber lights faded behind them. The inside of the ship was quiet and smooth, with controls that lit up at her touch, and seats that adjusted to their shape, and walls that showed stars in real time. As the ship lifted away from the station and began to move faster than light, Ethan looked out the window and saw the station grow small. Behind them, a bright wheel in the dark, spinning slowly and surrounded by silence. We made it, he said quietly. We really made it. Zarali nodded and said, you adapted well. You changed faster than I expected, and you stayed with me, even when everything turned against us. Ethan leaned back in his seat and laughed softly, not out of humor but out of relief and wonder. I thought this was just some strange mission, he said. I thought I was just some unlucky human chosen by mistake, but now I do not want to go back. I want to see where this goes. Zarali looked at him and said, then hold on, because my world is very different, and it does not slow down for anyone. The stars outside began to shift colors as the ship moved through different layers of space, and soon a new shape appeared ahead, a planet of green and silver surrounded by 3 moons and rings of glowing dust. That is Varelia. Zarali said my home, and now it is part of your story. Tootha. Ship moved closer, and the surface of the world came into view, shining cities floating above wide rivers, glowing forests under twin suns, mountains carved with lights and towers that touched the clouds. Ethan pressed his hand to the window and whispered, "This is real." All of it. Saral placed her hand beside his, and said, "And it is only the beginning." They entered the planet's orbit. A message appeared on the screen. "Welcome, bonded pair. Please prepare for the arrival ceremony and final integration." Ethan looked at her and said, "I thought we already passed the tests." "Those were the first ones," she replied. "Now they test the future, not the past. They want to see if we choose to stay bonded, when no one is watching, when the danger is gone." He thought about that and said, "I think I already know my answer." She looked at him and said, "So do I." Ship slowed and began its descent toward a glowing platform where figures waited, dressed in silver and white, the lights of the city dancing around them like fireflies in a stormless night. As the ship touched down, Ethan took one last breath as a human from Earth and stepped into a new life, a new bond, a new chapter. And somewhere high above in the stars, far from the noise of machines and war and doubt, a new program began with new names and new faces, guided by the story of two beings who chose trust over fear and connection over control. The story of Ethan and Zarali would be told for generations, not as legend, not as fantasy, but as the first spark that lit the path toward unity across the stars.